to a lot of white people. I mean, we talk about white people as a monolithic group, but
Right.
the amount of privilege is also intersected with class
Right.
and various other things. And so I think that a lot of it has to do with, again, looking at history, examining the ways that that privilege operates, and you know that's. I think that there is a real sense of resentment, sometimes to white anti-racist activists, if you could call them that,
Mm-hmm.
because you know who are they to say? You know they don't know. They're saying that we have all these privileges, but you know we don't have all these privileges. So there is that sense, and it's very challenging. I think I'm not sure I can even you know give an answer to it or a response. But I think that part of it is understanding the history and understanding the commonalities and understanding the system that's oppressing people, white people who are in, you know, in situations where they are oppressed, and seeing the links.
Sure, seeing the links between their oppression and what's playing out in white.
But I understand there's a lot of resentment.
Yeah,
You're
right.
like, who do you think you are? You go to
Right.
college, you think you know all this. This is not what our experience is. So making that connection is a challenge.
That's the connection. That's good. Mary, at Cambridge Ridge in Latin, is race and racism in America taught primarily as a thing of the past or present day reality? Is this taught to you all in your history classes and social studies classes in the context of what happened back then? Slavery, civil rights, Dr. King the Great Man, that sort of thing? Or is it taught as a present reality that folks are still living with even in the utopia of Cambridge?
To be honest with you, so far in my history class, I don't think we ever really have talked about racism in present day.
Wow.
But and I think that's just because I haven't had enough classes. I haven't gone through enough through the school, all the courses to see. But I do. There are classes about race and cultural identity, and there is a social justice class that does talk about it. But from the U.S. history perspective that I've had, no. And I think that's just because it's very. I don't think the teacher actually has been given the training needed to have a productive conversation.
I saw Counselor Simmons here earlier. You still here? Where are you? Yes, are you hearing all of this?
Yes, I'm listening.
Okay, thank you very much. This is our high school. So you've taken American history up through the present day in terms of the curriculum. Has it taken you up to the present day?
No. But we've stopped at Reagan.
Stopped at Reagan.
Yeah.
Well, that's far enough. Getting up to Reagan is more than far enough.
But like even with Reagan, we've never talked about the racism that he put into the place. We have to learn about that stuff on our own, which is a pain in the neck. If you don't have a computer at your home, or if you have to work several jobs to support your family, you never learn your own history because the school kind of fails you in that regard.
So I heard a reference earlier, I think Sister Shay was talking about this in terms of the commission reports that were coming out in the midst of the rebellions, depending on how you look at it, that went on in the late 60s, particularly in the wake of King's assassination. I remember from my work looking at the development of mass incarceration that there was a survey that was done looking at the issue of crime and anxiety of Americans around crime in the late 60s. And one of the top two things people were afraid of was Negroes would start riots. And this was about 1968. And so, of course, if we go back to what arguably has pushed this conversation into a new level in this season, in the situation in Ferguson, which was written by many as a riot, others as a rebellion. I would just throw the question out to this panel, using the language of the time, why do Negroes start riots? Anybody who wants to throw it in. Go ahead, Bo, please.
We'll be here all day about the term Negro, so let me
Yeah. I'm using the nomenclature of them for now.
You know, the first thing that comes to mind is like when does a black man get to be angry? Like, what has to happen? At what point is it okay to express anger? And to do it in a way that is constructive or expressive and not have a reaction that is negative or lethal. And so that's the space that we're in. Where does someone react to their humanity being the target? Where do you react to feeling like you are going to be and could be killed at any moment, anywhere, by somebody who you did nothing to? Where does that have a space to walk the earth? And when it doesn't have a space to walk the earth, it looks for spaces where it can show up a little bit. I mean, you know, hands up, don't shoot is showing up a little bit. It's a tiny little fraction of generations of frustration and anger. And I went to school in St. Louis. I've been in Ferguson. I've been in those communities. I've been spread eagle on the floor by the police in those communities for riding while black, not even driving. There isn't a space for the expression of the, you know, the kind of the weight of all of this. And so when you have, you know, a little leeway, a little place, you have people coming out and expressing all of those emotions in that space. And so, you know, what looks like a riot,
right,
or even, and I take issue with rebellion because it's expression of, at the very, very most, of ambition, perhaps just expression of feeling. That there was a rebellion is we are changing the ways in which we are governed. There wasn't even that. And that goes back to the 60s and so forth. And so there's a challenge. We've got to make the dialogue be about something that goes beyond that. We can express anger, but then we've got to do something with that. And so I look at how folks have marched in the streets. I took my wife to her first protest after Ferguson, which I could not believe, as somebody who has protested everything I can think of from single digits to now. This was her first protest. It's like, you know, okay, how did you feel about that? We debriefed on the way home, and I had to say, like, you know, wow, how have you lived a life in which this has not been part of what you know, don't do every day? Because protesting is something I don't do every day. I have a reason to every day. Every day I have a reason to get out and shout at the top of my lungs and scream and express that anger in ways that may not be constructive. I have a reason to do that, and I choose to not do it every day.
Sure.
And so that's something that, you know, we're walking around. You see black men walking around here, they're walking around with that anger. They're walking around with that wanting to express this emotion, wanting to express the feeling, wanting to express the fear and the, you know, lack of dignity that they see when things are shown to them that happen to them, and don't have a space for it. I mean, I've been really worried about what it means to demonstrate to black men what they know happens to them all the time, and doing it in public over and over and over again. Sooner or later, somebody is going to say, you know, I'm going to lose my mind and do something. And we haven't gotten in front of that yet. You know, we've got, you know, a few folks here and there who unfortunately have acted out on that anger and done really egregious things. And we don't want that to happen, but we haven't done anything to make sure that it doesn't happen. There's no soul soothing, there's no soul searching, we're not drum circling or anything to make sure it doesn't happen. So there's a space there that I think, you know, if there's a need for anyone to understand the expression of that, it's what can you do in physical form that your soul can't do. And that's the space that we're in. That's what that rebellion, as you put it, looks like.
Very good, very good.
But we've got to go beyond that.
Good, thank you. Do white people like yourself who are committed to fighting racism, do you all have a responsibility at some level to be willing to absorb black anger when it's expressed in your midst?
Yes, because what I've learned is that there's a limit to, as a white person, I think there's a limit to what book learning, as a white person, I've learned that there's a limit to what book learning can provide. And reading James Baldwin is an amazing experience and really offers an insight into both whiteness and blackness. But I think actually witnessing and taking in black anger, I'm not sure if it's possible to truly start to understand the depth of injustice around race, where it's the opposite of what makes sense in terms of what we do with race. And I think without witnessing it and sitting with it, we can't understand the depth of that.
So Shay, what are white folks supposed to do with that black anger when it comes to them and they're trying to understand the depths of it?
Well,
how are they supposed to sort through it?
that's an interesting question. I mean, I think that, to be honest, black anger can be really scary to white people. I think that there's a reason that black folks, as a general rule, we tend to keep our anger hidden, at least amongst ourselves, because it's sort of like there's this well and it's very deep, and if you let it out, it's very scary. I do think that if white folks are in spaces where they are bearing witness, they need to hold that space. But I would hope that, you know, with white folks like Abe here, or anybody, if you are in that space and you are privy to being able to witness black anger, I would hope that you would let it fuel the work that you do and the conversations that you have. One, because when I think about it, you know, personally, I don't think a lot of black folks, again, we don't enter those spaces with white people very often unless they somehow have an intimate relationship to us. And when it happens in a larger scale, you know, especially with some of the demonstrations that have gone on in the country, I think it's really important to understand that we can talk about the larger issues, but what you're really seeing is the collective pain of a group of people who have lived with pain for hundreds of years. And it kind of goes to your question, why do Negroes riot? Because we're angry, because we're tired. And I think there comes a point where you just can't stuff it down and you say, I'm done with it. It's got to just come out. And it, you know, sometimes that can be productive, sometimes not. And that too, I think, is part of when we have those experiences, and whites are part of it and bearing witness, that is something to guide your work. Because suddenly, thinking about what Abe just said, it's one thing to read the beautiful and haunting words of James Baldwin, but it's another thing to have it right there, to experience it, to feel that energy coming off of another human being. That's where the transformation comes. That's the place where white people and black people meet at the crossroads and connect as actual human beings. White people will go, hey, this isn't just a concept anymore. This is something as another fellow human being. I don't want to see that human in pain. What can I do? What is my role? And then go forth with it.
So, for the sake of the conversation, I'm going to establish a presumption, and we could debate this if we wanted to in another circle, but establish a presumption on this whole issue of what to do with the anger, as you put it, Mo, that destruction against property and destruction against persons is not the ideal expression of this anger, just for the sake of this conversation. So with that established, Mary, as the one who you said is perceived as the angry black woman at times, the CLRS, what do we do with that anger in the context of what Shay just pointed to? If we have any interest in reconciliation or any interest in building relationships, what should black people do with that anger? And then, Ms. Jennifer, I'm going to ask you, what should white people do with that anger in terms of moving towards relationship?
Okay, that's a big question.
I know. We don't deal in small questions here.
I think what black people should do, first and foremost, I come from an immigrant background, and something in the immigrant community that's very important is education. And I think that as black people, we need to, one, educate ourselves in what we're talking about, because there is that double standard where everything we do say is being questioned, is being constantly evaluated, and people not believing or not understanding what we're saying. And I feel like we must educate ourselves and be 100%, 120% sure of what we're talking about, so people understand us, because I'm tired of people not listening because they don't think that I know what I'm talking about when I know what I'm talking about. And I think that as a community we can really go ahead and educate ourselves, and once we educate ourselves, then it becomes so much easier to educate the other people around us. And I think that another thing we can do, and I really hope we do, is riot, is rebel. And I like the way that you talk about the rebellion, Mo. I think that it is important that we rebel and we really take down the system, because like even just being here, like I want to do something, like there's that pressure inside me to do something. And I think that together as a community we can do something if we work together, if we listen to each other, listening to white people, but more importantly listening to ourselves and working together and overcoming the different identities within our community, being inclusive to the LGBT community, to the immigrant community, to people who are low income, to Muslims, to all these different identities, because we need to accept and love one another before we go ahead and tear down the system.
All right, so we can tear it down together.
Yes.
Okay. All right, much better. Jennifer, what should white people be doing with this black anger?
I second the idea that we should be tearing the system down.
Okay.
I think that having that experience of black anger, it is very frightening. It's frightening because I'm not sure how to put it. It's frightening because it's really sort of a mirror, and we have to ask ourselves, why is this? What is it about? What is it about the society that's causing this? What is my responsibility? How am I complicit? And I think it is through very personal relationships of experiencing that anger and that pain that you come to this point of a leap where it's not tenable. You have to do something. And so figuring out what to do is another matter. But the system is not tenable. A system that makes people so angry and that creates this holding in that makes people sick, literally sick. We're part of that, and we're benefiting from that because it is a system. I agree entirely that white supremacy is the term we should be using. Racism tends to focus on the people of color. Like, let's fix the problems in communities of color. White supremacy makes it really clear. This is not about racism, reverse racism, or any of those things. This is about white supremacy. This is what needs to be fixed. So I think that what we need as white people to do with that anger is to really absorb it, listen to it, be present as horribly uncomfortable as it is, and be ready, willing to transform ourselves and to work to transform our society. It's a very I just think of in my life that experience that has really created a sort of shift in how I saw things. That that suddenly I realized that this was business as usual, just couldn't go on. That things had to change, and then questioning what role can I play in that.
Carla, can white supremacy be effectively undone? Is it possible, realistically, in your mind, to undo white supremacy in America in a way that actually makes a difference?
I don't doubt it at all. I feel like racism as a construct was created, so therefore we can dismantle it. So if white supremacy is an aspect of that, then definitely it can be tackled. One thing I wanted to tag onto the comments that both of you were just making is the fact that there are roles for everybody in this. There's no doubt. There's no question. It's not separate. We're all in this boiling pot together. So there's work that whites need to do without question with their families, with their friends, their conversations that aren't happening. There are people of color who have to lead the work. We're the ones who are dealing with the brunt of this. And there's a word we haven't used around accountability. Whites have to be accountable to people of color and have to understand that even though it's hard, sometimes it's a matter of following. Sometimes it's a matter of waiting for people of color to get to the point where they've dealt with the manifestations and all of the anger and all of the things that have manifested to the point that there's a strategy, there's a plan that whites can support. There are doors that whites need to open so people of color can get in to do the work, to have the conversations with people, to show that there is a relevance to this work. But that's my understanding. It's something that can be deconstructed. And I don't know how many people in the room have ever done a power analysis. Have you heard of a power analysis? When you really look at the community, and I'm talking about the black community in particular, I'll use that as an example. There are so many systems that are pounding that community. As Reverend Ford talked about, there's a criminal justice system. There's the system I work with in philanthropy. There are hospitals. There's even religion. People don't want to talk about it, but it's another system. We can go on and on and on and on with all the systems that are combating that community. But that was created. It was a construct intentionally to divide people, and it's working. So if we really understand, as Mary mentioned, how all this operates and how it works, then we can definitely strategize together. Once we get to the point of understanding and have that education, that analysis, because we've got to be able to have a shared language. As I mentioned, language is key. Because when you mention certain words, oh my gosh, they cut people to the core and the conversation shuts down and we can't do the work. But by having that education, by having an understanding, by really understanding how those parts and pieces work, we can definitely confront it. And with language, it's not just about riot or rebellion, but let's use the word movement. Because we need a movement. That's what we got to create. And there have been many, many movements. We are in the midst of one right now. And I believe that with momentum, with understanding, with working together, with strategizing, with effective community organizing, we can really change things. We can turn it around. I get up every day and do the work I do and go to work because I believe that change can happen. Mary, our young sister in this table, if she doesn't give you hope, I don't know what does. Oh my gosh. Yes, it can happen. Absolutely.
So Mo, last word before we move into a Q&A and discussion here. Whether we're using the term rebellion, whether we're using the term movement, we've heard a lot said from a number of folks about the important role of education. What else does the rebellion look like? What else does the movement look like besides educating ourselves and educating others?
Thank you. The power analysis you talked about is really important. I think it's about folks looking at where does white supremacy live? Institutions, organizations, government, business. If you are in a neighborhood where nobody of color owns a house on your street, that's white supremacy. If you walk into a department within the city structure where no one of color works, or no one of color works in administration or leadership, that's white supremacy. If you walk into a store and you don't see anything that reflects any other culture but the dominant white American culture, that's white supremacy. So you've got to start to call this stuff out. There's a dismantling of the system that's external that we have to do, but then we've got to dismantle the stuff that's on the inside. So if you think about your closest non-family friend, all the things that you do with that person, you go out and take walks, you go to the movies, go to the museum, you have them over for dinner, you've gone on vacations with, all that long list of things that you do with that close family friend, do it across race with somebody. Ask yourself, when was the last time that you were at someone's house across race? When did you sit down and play with their children and they played with your children? When did you, break bread literally with them? And that's the beginning of addressing this. We have to do the big work that's at the system level and then the people work to make this actually live. Like go and, hug your white sister. All right? But then hold her accountable to where she goes to have her take on white supremacy there too. And make sure that it's not something that you casually let go. Come back to it every year. Ask yourself why things are the way that they are. How many folks were in Massachusetts in 1980? Just put your hand up. In
1980.
In 1980, were in Massachusetts, all right? What percentage of the population in Massachusetts was white in 1980? Take a guess. You said 97%. Other folks, take a guess. 80, 85, anybody else? 85? 87%. It's like Price is Right really quickly, right? 87.1. 92% of Massachusetts was white of the population. 92. You were close. You were close, right? So that's a real challenge for how we do this work. Because anybody have a sense of what the white population in Massachusetts is now? Like high 60s, 69, 70 something. Close like that. Somewhere in that number. Of Massachusetts today, we have this coming shift in demographics of the country as a whole. We're going to become a minority, majority country, etc. It will exacerbate these tensions if we are not building those relationships. Thanks for saying it, sister. If we're not building those relationships today, there are people who are hanging on to power against what cannot be held. Ferguson is a prime example. You've got this huge minority population being governed and policed by this tiny minority population. We can't be that population anymore. We can't be that state anymore. So we've got to start dismantling some of that at the system level now, before people are trying to hang on for dear life and do really awful things to remain in power. I started today by saying that part of racism is a cloak that people wear when they are in a struggle for resources. We've got to make sure that we are in partnership enough that I never have to, beg or break your bread for me to have some. If we don't have that struggle, racism doesn't win. So let's go there.
Very good. I want to thank this panel. We've got about 20 minutes for a conversation with you, the audience, who've been so attentive, and so I don't know how those who are running this event want to do this, but I would just suggest you maybe put your hand up, and then be sure to use your outside voice, as we used to say, to ask your question. You can direct it at a particular panel member or at the entire panel if you would like. Please go ahead, my sister.
So I know I go to school with Mary, and I feel like 9th and 10th grade, it's just about like, you just want to pass your classes. We all want to graduate. So U.S. History 1 is really about just like teaching you your basic concepts. Same thing with English and all that, just to get you, so when you hit 11th and 12th grade, you can actually do stuff. So I suggest that you wait until 11th grade, because you're really going to like some of the classes you can finally take. U.S. History 2, that's all you focus on, is racism and civil rights. So that was a very interesting class. Especially English 11, you focus on all of the isms, so like you cover them all, and every class has guest speakers, and it's very interesting. But what I found, this is like my own personal opinion, is that when you're in classes that you need to take, you don't necessarily share your opinion because you just want to pass it, like you have to take it. But when you hit 11th and 12th grade, you can take classes that you want to take. So like I take racial and cultural identities, and like I want to be there. So I'm not uncomfortable when certain topics come up because I chose to be there. So I feel like when you hit 11th and 12th grade, you get to experience a different group of people that like want to have these types of conversations and that like want to talk about these things. So you're able to talk about more stuff. So like 11th and 12th grade, I feel like it's kind of a disservice to those in the 9th and 10th, but when you really hit the 11th and 12th grade, you definitely get to have a lot of more interesting conversations, and you get to do a lot of more things and say a lot more things. So.
Good. Good. It's good to know. Good to know. All right. Others, questions or comments? Please.
Again, to Mary, sorry, but you said that 60% of the students at CLRS are students of color. Do you know the teacher percentage?
I don't, but it's not that many. I don't know, maybe like 10-20% are of color.
Does anybody know the percentage of faculty at Cambridge Regional Latin who are of color, teachers of color?
20%.
20%.
There was several years ago in '82, there was a suit taken against the city, and out of that, they said they would have 25% administrators and 25% teachers of color. And the problem was they would advance or promote the teachers to the administrative ranks, but not backfill. So I've not looked at the statistics in a long time, so I could be talking a little out of turn, but it's probably somewhere around 20-25%. I know they've had some new hires because they've developed a middle school model, and they hired a few minority men in particular. But I know it's called the settlement agreement. Asked for 25% in both categories, administrators and in the teaching ranks. But it's always been a struggle to get to that 25%.
Because that's certainly a very specific thing one could agitate for and keep pressing for, to have the
If they haven't
faculty
abandoned it
look like
altogether, because as what happened at the University of Michigan when you've had this sort of retreat from affirmative action, school districts in particular, I was on the school committee in Cambridge when they dropped race as a factor to get parity in the schools, and that was to be, if you want to call that proactive, to keep from being sued. And so what we did was we inserted social class in for race. Now, social class is not equal to race, and we could go into a long conversation about why that is not correct. And so we still have schools that are out of racial balance, out of compliance because of that, but that's another struggle.
So 60% students of color, Cambridge Regional Latin, and maybe 20% faculty of color. Put a pin in that as something to take away from this conversation. What do we do about that if we think that's a problem? All right. Questions, other questions or comments for the panel? Let me ask this question to the panel and those on the audience who want to dig in as well, because Councilor Simmons brings up a very important issue, of course, thanks to the efforts of Ward Connolly and others. We have been forced into a situation by the courts and whatnot to act post-racially when it comes to issues like affirmative action, even though many would argue that we're not post-racial in that regard. How do you try to address issues like the very one we just brought up in the context where you're worried about a lawsuit if you get too explicit about the words that shut down conversations and the things that have to come out of those in trying to address diversity? How do we deal with that? 2015, we're about to be in the post-Obama era on top of that. Abe, go ahead, please.
Well, I just think that if we focus on that exclusively, on percentages, which is important, but we can totally miss the situation, the systemic nature that got us there.
Okay.
So that I just think it's important to keep in mind that when we look at like the staff at CRLF, if you remember, there was down in Atlanta recently, there's that story of like 20 teachers of color
Right.
at a school that I'm assuming has a large number of teachers of color, and they're getting put on the chopping block because they were pressed to get higher scores. So I just want to put that out there just to keep in mind that you can address those. That's like the tip of the iceberg, I think, and it's important because, as Mary said, like to be a student of color, hearing from white people about like racism or lack of racism, I don't know what that's like, but it sounds pretty aggravating. But then to say that we can solve it just by doing that, I feel like that's the trap that we may be able to, that we might fall into with this movement, to say, all right, let's put body cameras on and that'll solve everything, as opposed to saying what is beneath that makes us in that situation.
Good. Good. Please, sir.
I think one of the ways we address it is going back to what Bo was talking about in particular, especially in a community such as ours here in Cambridge, is we have to be willing to break not only break bread, but break table, and break home, and go to each other. Because you want to address that situation here at Cambridge, and in particular Cambridge Region Latin, you're going to do it with parents who are together on that situation. Because then they're not going to care about whether or not there's a lawsuit if you got your community behind a particular issue. The lawsuit is actually not even going to come up if everybody's behind the issue, because they're going to say, we're not interested in lawsuit, we're interested in making the situation right. So it has to come from the community perspective to address that issue of what the high school, the makeup of the teacher ratio at the high school. If it's put forth by the community, you get somewhere with it. And until you put it forth from the community, it stays like it is. And that comes out of a whole thing of, particularly in Cambridge, if you get into self-interest and who's invested in it staying like it is and who isn't, who benefits from it and who doesn't. Because that's where you look at the reasons of why is it like it is now.
Very good, thank you. Others, questions or comments? I heard a question right here, go ahead.
So, and I think education is a huge part of it. So, nationally, the statistics are that 85% of American teachers are white. And one of the real obstacles right now is that to become educated as a teacher, the cost of getting that education is prohibitive because the teaching salary is so low that you can't pay off your loans. And so now that's a structural barrier, and who ends up becoming teachers are middle class, upper middle class, often white women who are not necessarily going to be the primary breadwinner. We still have that female construct going on. And so that's who's showing up in our teacher programs all across the country now. And so to understand it's not just a Cambridge problem, but it's this broader problem.
Right. So, Councilor Simmons, how does Cambridge compare in terms of rates of teacher pay to the national situation with this whole issue of the rate being high enough to take care of yourself, loans, household, get educated, all that sort of thing? We know.
This would be a good Richard Hardy question. I actually don't know.
Okay.
I would say the beginning teacher salary is somewhere around 60. And then as you get an advanced degree, it gets higher.
Right.
Now, it's certainly not enough to buy a home or rent in Cambridge, which is a whole nother struggle.
So could this be something to look at on the school committee or Go ahead, go right in.
Cambridge, Boston, and Brookline have the highest salaries in Massachusetts. Massachusetts has some of the highest teacher salaries in the country. The average in Cambridge is $80,000, but you have to take into effect the people who have graduate degrees and have been there for 15 years. But Cambridge is really in the very top.
Isn't the base somewhere around 60 and then you add on to that?
In Cambridge, no, it's lower than that. It's lower than that. When you have a master's degree and you've been there for about 5 years, you're going to be making about 55. I have a PhD. I've looked into teaching here, and I would start at 50. So you're starting in the 40s, but median salary for the U.S. is, I know cost of living here is higher, but teacher salaries are median income and higher. So I'm going to say, yes, it's primarily a second income job, but this is also a middle class. This is a job for educated people moving into families moving up middle class and professional class. So in the national perspective.
Well, two quick things. Back in the 80s, Cambridge actually went out and did a recruit. They literally got people to go down south. Les Kimbrough was one of the people that came here. I can see his face, I can't think of his name. They were very close, but they recruited, they deliberately went out and said, we are going to change our distribution of teachers of color in our system, and we deliberately went out. And we've not done that. That might be something that Cambridge might want to think about, being very deliberate about hiring. But the other thing is, you're not going to have 100% teachers of color.
Right.
So it's really important that I think schools of higher learning that educate teachers have some curriculum around cultural competency, and a lot of them do not. So you'll get a teacher that went to school in Coda and they're not accustomed to working in urban setting, and they bring those biases with them. And so that's one of the things that when we think about how we can impose, make changes, how do we get to, I think Leslie's not too bad at it, but other schools that train teachers, make it mandatory. It should be mandatory that teachers get that kind of sensitivity or cultural competency training, and they don't.
Very good, thank you, Counselor.
I think,
Go ahead.
I think also it's really important that that people realize, I think a lot of white people anyway, think, well, what does it matter what the color of the teacher is? We're all the same. We can all teach the same thing if we're trained. And that ignores the fact that students of color need to have role models, but it also ignores the fact that white kids need to have role models. They need to have teachers of color. They need to have administrators of color. They need to have people in authority, in positions of authority who are people of color, so they can understand how to act in the world. But there are a lot of people, I mean, we really have to reach out to the larger community of parents, I think. And, you know, it's a big job. I'm not sure how it's done, to really help people understand why it's important to have a diverse teaching staff, and a staff that's not diverse just, but that reflects the student population, and that comes with a range of experiences, not just a training, but a range of experiences that can be shared with the students. You know, it's just so important on so many levels, but I think there is a sense, I hear it a lot, well, you know, it doesn't matter who you are. You know, it doesn't matter what your racial identity is or your sexual identity. Anyone can teach. And anyone can teach, but everyone teaches from a particular perspective, and those perspectives are so important.
Very good, thank you. Any other audience questions, sir? Go ahead. Yeah, that's you.
I'd like to hear some thoughts from the panel about the housing crisis in Cambridge. It seems to me that we're moving into, this is going to be a city with black people living in the developments and wealthy white people living in private houses. And I just think that Cambridge is two cities.
Sure.
So what can we do about the housing crisis?
Sure, of course we know that there was a big expose not too long ago about a study on poverty in Cambridge that showed that it's concentrated in two particular neighborhoods, so-called Area 4, the Port, and I can't remember the other community where it's concentrated. But how do we consider this question of race and white supremacy and all that in the context of housing in a place like Cambridge, one of the highest costs of living? Anyone here on the panel want to dig in on that?
I think you have to call it what it is first and say, that's white supremacy. And then how do we dismantle it? What are we willing to change, give up? And this is the central question for America around these issues. Who on your street is going to move to make your street equal? Who at your job is going to leave to make your job equal? How will equity happen if we are unwilling to have the gained and unearned privileges and resources redistributed? And if we're not willing to have that conversation, if we're not willing to address that, then it will be exactly where we're going. I mean, I look back 30 years ago, the neighborhood that I lived in was a very, very mixed neighborhood. I mean, like, you know, a thriving Puerto Rican community, a African-American community, historic, quote unquote, white folks that lived in the Port, had been there second, third generation, an immigrant population, and lots of people moving in and out of that neighborhood. I look at it now, and we've got a few stalwarts who've hung on, a few people who managed to buy their homes and not sell them between 97 and now, once rent control went, and their friends call them crazy. Some of y'all know who you're talking about, right? And then you have an influx of people who bless them for coming and living with us, and we need to enjoy them as our community, but they've changed the racial dynamic of that community. And it's socioeconomic, but it's also, you know, folks will go to the places where they are feeling welcome, and we are losing that. And the only place that that doesn't happen is in public housing. It doesn't happen here, is in public housing. And so that's the dynamic that we're playing with right now, is that we were on this side of Cambridge, maybe 40, 60 community, and we're becoming an 80-20 like the rest of the community, rest of Cambridge. I remember saying to young people that Cambridge was 70% white, and they could not believe it because their experience of Cambridge was this multi-ethnic, multiracial, amazing, you know, you walk the neighborhoods and you have friends from all over the world and so forth, but the places where they went were the neighborhoods you just talked about and a few fringes right around there, and they didn't go into the rest of the community. And so if you walk into and you walk down, I'm not going to name streets, because folks will be mad at me. If you walk down that street and there's nobody of color who has ever owned a house there, that's white supremacy also. And if we're not willing to disturb that, to unpack that, to remedy that, then we're not going to do anything about housing affecting the demographic in Cambridge.
Very good. I want to let Abe get in here, and then I want to respect the fact that I think it's 7:50. We're supposed to move towards the close here, and we're about there. So go ahead, Abe.
Just that I think that I think white people, we have to get straight on race, because I think true people's movements, which I think are the only thing that can really stop something like the gentrification that's happening, where it's not going to be individual people saying, I will choose not to buy this condo. That's not going to do it. So true people's movements, I think that the only people waiting behind and everyone else is waiting up for is white people to get straight on race. Because until we get straight on race, and I'm saying this from personal scarring experiences, until I get straight on race, there is no way that I can join a movement that's actually building power across dividing lines of race, because I'm toxic. Because I think I have the answers, and I think that I'm ready to show up, and all I'm doing is dissipating energy and sucking energy and just taking what could be and turning it into something that can't move, because now I've inserted my toxicness that can't even see the toxicness. Toxicness masquerading as superiority. And so until we do, so I think anytime we're talking about in Cambridge or wherever, if we're talking about really making systemic change, we've got to get ourselves and to help other white people to get straight on race. And Carla, I think offhand mentioned the People's Institute, I think when she was talking about just getting a core definition of what is race, what is racism, and trying to get people to have the same definition. I think for white people, if we can't do that in a multiracial environment, we can't be helpful.
So, a couple of takeaways I want to just suggest to everyone here before we turn over to Pastor Linda Jordan. One, that two of the fronts that we need to be thinking a whole lot more about where white supremacy and racism is playing out in Cambridge is in the lack of diversity within our public school education system here within Cambridge, the lack of adequately diverse perspectives that our students are being exposed to. Two, the housing crisis and gentrification that is going on in Cambridge. And the third piece that we didn't get to explore a lot, but certainly as a pastor and theologian I would have loved to, is what impact does white supremacy have on your soul? All right, Pastor Linda.
I think we went there.
Yeah, we went there a little bit. We went there a little bit. I wanted to go there more. I had some James Cone to talk about. I wanted to go there more. Pastor.
Oh, I want to thank the panelists, the moderator, for taking the time out of your busy schedule to come. Let's give them another round of applause. We do have some gifts for you, so please don't leave until I see you at the end of the evening. I'd like to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to come and to participate and engage in this discussion, this powerful discussion that we've had on eliminating racism in our community. Ariel and I will be co-directing, co-chairing the committee at the YWCA Cambridge that will work towards moving the eliminating racism agenda forward in our community. In collaboration with other organizations that are like-minded, have like-minded goals, we will sponsor other events such as book talks, film viewings, and discussions, and other symposia that will bring people together to plan and develop activities that will promote the anti-racist agenda. We invite you to join us to any or all of these activities that you have time to attend, and we ask that you please make sure that you give your email address leave your email address so that we can let you know about these activities. Last but certainly not least, we'd like to thank again the rest of the committee on the Social Justice Advocacy Committee and Ever and Anna for all their work. And you have a nice evening.
Well, folks, it was fun. Thank you. I enjoyed all of it. I got to read your blog, Black Girl Man.